All right, good morning, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We are letting folks file into the Zoom room, such as it is. We're glad everyone chose to spend some time with us this morning. This is a critical choice we're all making here in California. And so, by way of introduction, I'm going to keep this short because we want to make sure we have as much time as possible with Mr. Tom Steyer. So, I'm Geoff Green, the CEO at California Association of Nonprofits. Many of you here know us well. We are the advocate for the nonprofit sector here in California, 110,000 strong 501c3 public charities, doing a combination of policy, advocacy work, education, and data and research work. This is something we are doing today because it is critical to help everyone get clear that although nonprofit charities, 501c3 public charities may not be partisan, we are actually wonderful political actors. We should engage on policy, budget choices, priorities, and all the like. And that is what we're doing here with our gubernatorial race here in 2026. As I said, an important choice for California. Well, here's what we did. We invited all of the candidates polling 5% and above over the last few months since late last year as polling began, and invited them to come talk to us. And we're delighted that Mr. Tom Steyer accepted that invitation. And so we're going to jump right into it. And I am simply going to welcome you, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Geoff, thank you very much for having me. It's a treat.
Rather than jump into any particular questions, and we'll get into the weeds soon here, but I do want to give you just an opportunity to say a few words to the folks gathered about just who you are, your background, and why you chose to jump into this race for governor here.
So let me say something about nonprofits and my relationship with them first, Geoff.
Well, that would be my second question, but we'll take that. Absolutely.
I do want to get back to who I am, and I know you need to hear that, but let me say this. I love nonprofits. I've started nonprofits that are members of this organization. I've donated, my wife, Kat Taylor, and I have donated to lots of nonprofits. We are very proud of what those organizations have done, very proud. We feel like nonprofits should be treated like the private sector in dealing with the state government, and I know that isn't happening. Let me say, in terms of my campaign, just a brief snapshot. Our campaign is about the fact that Californians can't afford to live in California anymore. It's too expensive. And I know that's not news to the nonprofit sector because you guys work on the front lines. You are the people who work to help people who've been left behind by the private sector and underserved by the public sector. And I know that that work is essential. And I know that it's hard. And I know that it is very often unrecognized. And I want to say, I will never take it for granted. I know the gigantic contribution that the nonprofit sector makes to California in terms of, how many people it employs, how many people volunteer in it, how much impact it has on our way of life and our economy. So I want to say, I have been a partner to nonprofits for a very long time, and as governor, that is the relationship that I'd want. I would want to be a partner to help you help people. And let's talk a little bit. There's a lot more to say about my life, but I can say that for the last 15 years, I've been fighting for Californians, often through the organizations that are members of this coalition. Certainly that experience has shaped my understanding of what government does and what government needs to do. I have, not through nonprofits, fought 3 proposition battles against well-funded corporate interests and beaten them every time. But for instance, Kat Taylor and I started a nonprofit community bank in Oakland that we've run for over 20 years that has done a whole bunch of things, partnered with an awful lot of nonprofits. We've financed 17,000 low-income housing units, for instance. We're a huge lender to use in terms of the used car loan market. And we generally cut the rate in half when we start, and that rate continues to go down. Our job in that bank is to provide finance in a fair way to people who are being redlined or taken advantage of by the commercial institutions. We also founded Next Gen Policy, which not only is a member of this coalition, it fights for justice and equity in state policy as its goal, but it is a close partner with CalNonprofits and has run workshops about how to not lobby, but speak to your legislators. And those lobbying sessions that Next Gen Policy put on have also been a way to form coalitions because we've done it by sector. And in particular, I know that we've worked with CalNonprofits on public service loan forgiveness, something that's very important to nonprofits across this state. And in fact, have also worked on creating the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, which is something else that's very important. So I want to say, Geoff, yeah, I'm talking about single payer healthcare. I'm talking about breaking up the electric monopolies in this state. I'm talking about building 1 million homes that Californians can afford. So there's a huge agenda that our campaign has that's very different from everyone else running for governor and very much informed by my experience with California nonprofits and very much informed by understanding from my history in the private sector about when the private sector is misbehaving and taking advantage of Californians. And that's the difference between me and everybody else in this race is I'm the person who wants to do structural change and is willing to take on the corporate special interests who are opposing it. And I know we'll get more into that, but you should understand there's one person really trying to change California and everybody else is a status quo candidate. And the way you can know that is follow the money. They're spending tens of millions of dollars to stop me because they know that I'm not kidding, that if I get in, I really will do the things I'm saying I'm going to do. And they're worried about their future profits.
Great. Well, thank you. And I can certainly confirm all of that, the partnerships you mentioned, certainly those folks are strong allies for a lot of the work that we do. Let's talk about some of those dynamics with government and state government. I know you've seen our policy agenda, and we do get into those wonky issues with the relationship between government and nonprofits. And of course, in California, I mentioned 110,000 nonprofits, and state government leans pretty heavily on them to execute any number of different missions. And I'm curious, what in the role of governor, what would you see as the issues that you would want to work on with what that relationship looks like, whether we're talking about contracting or grants or any of the other things that we tend to be partners with government on?
Well, I think what I was trying to say in my opening statement was I understand that the government basically treats nonprofits as second order partners at best. So that there are rules for how you're supposed to pay contractors in the state of California and those rules don't apply to nonprofits. And I think that there's been very inadequate coordination around organizing nonprofits and setting up rules so that they get paid fairly on time and at a fair rate. And so to a very large extent, I think as governor, I know that there are bills in the works in the legislature. And so, for instance, the idea that we form an office of nonprofit empowerment, of course we should have that. Of course, this is a huge relationship for the state. And the lack of coordination is really a little scary. And I think somewhat characteristic of our state government. So of course I'm for that, but I'm also for having rules that people are treated fairly. And I'm also, given what a big part of the state the nonprofit sector really is, I think that having more dialogue, more coordination, and what I described as a real partnership is something that is obviously called for. And so that's really what I think is the way we should go.
Great. I appreciate that. I think you mentioned some of your engagement with nonprofits, including helping to fund and co-found some. So you clearly have more engagement than many with the sector directly. I'm wondering if there's anything that stood out to you when you looked at our policy platform that was either surprising or unusual, or anything that stuck out for you on that list of issues that we're struggling with as a sector.
I'm very supportive of it, Geoff. I think that the thing that when I started, I said, the work you do is essential, the work you do is hard, and the work you do is often unrecognized. And I think that the unrecognized part, I think is then played back in terms of the treatment at the hands of the state government. And I think that understanding how critical this is, look, I will bore the hell out of everybody in this campaign and as governor with two rules. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And God is in the details. And so that's going to be true at every level of what we do in state government. It's going to be like, look, I know how critical this sector is. I also know that in order to accomplish things, you need to absolutely understand what the goals are, what it looks like, and how we're doing. And if you can't do that, it's a mess. And, that is so. And the other thing is, good work does not happen at 30,000 feet. Goals are set at 30,000 feet. Good work is done very much nose to the grindstone. That's why I said God is in the details. And so, we're going to have to make sure that we really are measuring what the outcomes are and that really good people are running the organizations that have real responsibility and that they absolutely kind of like, we're happy to talk at 30,000 feet. We're happy to talk at 1 foot. That's the only way I believe you can actually accomplish things. And, that's what I insist on.
So that's a great point. So on the ground, let's talk a little bit about that. The things that state government does rely on the sector for through contracting and other sort of extension and reach of government can, a lot of social safety net work is done that way. And of course, that's a combination of there's federal funding, state funding, sometimes local. When you look at the sort of map of the moment, what do you see as some of those threats, and how would you, in the role of governor, help to navigate?
Look, I think a couple things.
Yeah.
I think the federal government is trying, you talk about social safety net. And of course, that's something that I talk a lot about. And I talk about being for single payer healthcare. And I talk about how we need money to be able to pay people fairly, all of which is true. Obviously, that's very much at odds with the current federal administration under Donald Trump. And what he's been doing has been very much attacking really the social safety net as an idea and the funding for the social safety net, specifically in the state of California. And if you look at HR 1, it's kicking 1 to 3 million people off Medi-Cal. It's attacking SNAP benefits. And there's been a long history of trying to and he said, good grief, hard to believe, we're fighting wars now. We can't pay for Medicare or Medicaid. It's kind of like, oh my gosh. So to a very large extent, as a state, we need to figure out how to fill in the holes, push back, try and get the federal government to fulfill its responsibilities, but also make sure that we're taking care of people. And it's going to be very much a question of a partnership between the nonprofit sector and the state government.
So the sector, as you may know, is one of the largest employers as well. And we often get sometimes feeling patronized, but some compliments on our mission work as a sector, but not always taken seriously as a business sector. And so we do a lot of our work to try to make the point that in fact California has almost 1.5 million employees in the nonprofit sector. And that doesn't count the fact that the vast majority of nonprofits are actually all volunteer organizations. So even with that fact, we're still one of the largest employment sectors by our latest research with University of San Diego, the third largest private employer.
It's up to third. I had it at fourth. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm moving up. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, but
I'm not sure either.
But that's the data. And of course, I don't have to tell you the affordability question is permeating all right now. So nonprofits get squeezed by being told to pay less or sort of race to the bottom metrics with what that overhead cost is when it comes to contracts. And that's not just with government. That's with a lot of funders. While at the same time, those same employees are themselves struggling to make it in California. So how do you see that cross current or set of cross currents, if you will, about keeping a workforce healthy and growing, but also looking at what it takes to actually live and survive in California?
Look, there are two things I'll say. The obvious one is, I started by saying our campaign is all about dropping costs for Californians, dropping housing costs, dropping healthcare costs, dropping electricity costs, dropping gasoline costs, and we're going to see a big rise in food prices based on this war. And there's just true. So that's the people who are fighting me are the people who don't want to drop their costs because their profits come out of charging a lot for Californians. And obviously Californians can't afford it. But the flip side of the coin, which you allude to, Geoff, is making sure that people have a living wage. And in our bank, we always said, banks, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's something like, half of the bank tellers in the United States of America are on public assistance, food benefits, SNAP. I mean, that's amazing. These are people making a lot of money. And they are absolutely putting their costs on the taxpayers. And, we wanted very much not for that not to happen. So we were always paying, dramatically more than other people in the banking industry. And we were paying a living wage and we were giving good benefits. And in fact, we're one of, I think, only 4 unionized bank in the United States of America, and the only one that's been started in the last 45 years. So we very much see the other side of the coin in terms of paying people fairly. And let me say that as I travel around California and talk to people in what I think of as the care economy. So whether that's healthcare, childcare, home care, the people who are in making that economy work and taking care of everybody else in the state are dramatically squeezed. And so it's, getting those numbers to a fair place is one of the reasons that I'm bringing revenue. I've said I'll, on day one, declare a special election to close a corporate real estate tax loophole worth $20 billion so that we can deliver great education and healthcare to Californians and pay the people who are doing the work a fair, wage. It's absolutely both sides. We're not going to be able to cut ourselves all the way. We're going to have to make sure people are fairly paid.
Right.
No question about it.
Right. So you've been answering this next question a lot, I know, so you won't be shocked to hear me to ask it. But in an affordability crisis era where that sort of permeates all, there is this question about someone with such significant resources, jumping into the race. We know that you've disclosed all of your expenditure, and it's of course far beyond what other candidates are doing. And at the same time, you've gotten some critiques or questions about how those dollars get made, especially when you look back earlier in your career. And it's in areas and issues that, of course, we in the nonprofit sector work to combat. So I'm just curious how, walking into this and with the nonprofit experience that you've had, you answer those sort of critiques and questions.
Look, I know people are skeptical of billionaires. I'm skeptical of billionaires. Watching how the billionaires in our society have been behaving, you'd be nuts not to be skeptical. But let me say this. I'm not taking the money from these corporate special interests. They're fighting me tooth and nail. I'm not. Billionaires are scared of me and angry at me. They're supporting everybody else. So the first thing I'll say is I'm the only billionaire on the ballot, but I'm very far from the only billionaire in the race. The billionaires are all weighing in on behalf of other candidates and very strongly, specifically against me. So I'm the billionaire who's for single payer. I'm the billionaire who's taking on the electric monopolies and saying I'm going to drop electricity costs by 25%. I'm the billionaire who's going to build 1 million houses and take them on and take on the big oil companies. And the last thing I want to say is this. I don't know if you noticed, but in the second to last debate, which I think was last Tuesday, there were 7 people on this stage. They asked if you would support the billionaire tax. 6 said no. And I said I would vote for it. So let's be clear. We have a state that is the richest state and the richest country in the history of the world. We have the highest poverty rate in the United States of America. We have the majority of Californians who cannot make rent and pay for their health care at the end of the month. And there's one candidate who's standing up for working people. So the question I would ask you, Geoff, is, do you want the billionaire who's fighting for working people, or do you want the career politicians who are fighting for billionaires? That's what this has come down to. And that's the question in front of people.
Right. Appreciate that. You mentioned earlier that one of the things you would do quickly is close some tax loopholes. And of course, there are plenty. We all know our tax system is about as complicated as it can get. I want to say that. I hope I'm not hinting that it gets more complex anytime soon. But as far as other things that may be directly related in the nonprofit sector, are there a top 1, 2, or 3 priorities that you would commit to with respect to supporting, partnering, with the sector in the role of governor?
Well, I think to have an office of nonprofit empowerment, so a direct link, so everybody, so you know exactly who to call, and so that you get kind of a representative in state government on the line, all the time, is going to be very, very helpful and important. I think that I would I would commit to sitting down with you guys in the first month of my governorship to say, let's figure out where we need to go and what we need to do in terms of management and in terms of goals. And that is something that that I'll give you my word on. And I feel as if long-term, this really is a question of getting this sector to be, the government to be more measured, but also bringing in people who are really, really, my experience of business is you have to understand what you're trying to do. You have to have a culture. You have to have goals and a strategy. But then whether anybody can have that, do you have the people who can actually carry that out? And it's going to be critical in thinking about how the state government interacts with the nonprofit sector to have people there with whom you have a great relationship and a real deal of partnership, knowing that this is a sector that I've been very involved in, have participated in for decades, feel a lot of respect for and want to support, but there's still going to be the day-to-day, and that's going to be one.
Good. Well, I know we're a little short on time here, so I want to make sure that we let you go when you need to. But I did want to ask if there's anything in closing, either a sort of just a personal story of your relationship with nonprofits, as far as, I know you founded them, but anything like that, or just other final words that you want to share with the nonprofit community. We've got a few hundred folks very interested in hearing this.
So let me say this.
Yeah.
Look, I've never inherited a penny in my life. I'm from a family. My mom was a teacher in very disadvantaged schools. And when she retired from being a teacher, she taught in prisons. My brother Jim has been involved, if you guys know Jim Steyer, who lives in California, he's been an advocate for at-risk kids since he graduated early from high school in order to work in the public schools with my mom. And my wife, Kat Taylor, has led so many nonprofits, been on the boards of so many nonprofits, is incredibly dedicated to this sector, and I said, Kat, you've been doing economic, racial, and environmental justice for 50 years. She said, that's not true, 60 years. And so to a very large extent, this is a sector which my family and I have been working in for a really long time. I started a business and made a bunch of money. Kat and I have taken a pledge to give the bulk of that money away while we're alive. I'm not going to die a billionaire or anything close to it. And so, to a very large extent, I quit my job 14 years ago. I've been working on this stuff full time for 14 years for justice, for the environment, for working people. And that's exactly what my campaign is about. So to a very large extent, to the extent people share the values implied in the nonprofit sector, that's what my family's life has been about. That's what my life is about. And that's really the thrust of what my campaign is about. So the idea that, I try and be practical about everything I do, but I'm also the progressive in this race. There's one person trying to change California for the better and not taking any money from anybody. And everybody else is basically a same steady as she goes person. And steady as she goes is not working for working Californians. It is absolutely not. And the level of inequality in our state and society is worse than in the Gilded Age. And it's not right. And I'm the person who's standing up to take that on.
Well, thank you, Tom Steyer, making time for us today. We appreciate you prioritizing the nonprofit sector in this conversation. For those of you watching, this has been recorded. We will post it so you can share it with your friends and neighbors. And again, thank you, Mr. Steyer.
Can I say one last thing, Geoff?
You absolutely can.
We can have the greatest state in the history of the world. We are in a position where we can actually get that. We have to be willing to go after it. We can literally have the greatest society ever in the most beautiful state. We have the ability to do it, share our prosperity. That's what we need to do, and that's what I'm pushing for.
Great. Much appreciated, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoff. See you guys.
All right, folks, that is Mr. Tom Steyer running for governor of California. We jumped right into it at the front end just because we had a slightly late start. Thank you, technology of the day. But wanted to just show fill in the pieces I didn't say at the front end, which is that we continue to do this. We've invited all candidates who are polling above 5% to join us. This is the second in our series of conversations. We again believe that although nonprofit C3 public charities may not weigh in on partisan races, either for or against, we cannot endorse, we cannot be donors, but we absolutely can engage in conversation about the relationship between our elected officials and nonprofits. So we encourage you to take a look with others on our website at what we have done already, and we hope to bring you more of these conversations in the coming days up until the June 2nd primary. Again, thank you very much. Please check out calnonprofits.org, and we will be back again with you soon. Thank you all.